Okay, welcome back everyone. So we're going to continue on a similar thread to the previous video, except now when we look at loops, we're going to look at while loops. And also something called do-while loops, which are very similar. And hopefully familiar to stuff that you've seen prior to coming into this class. But as mentioned before, worth having a review to clarify any misconceptions. So when we take a look at a while loop, in this case, we're dealing with, and it's actually kind of a simpler construct than a for loop. And we really have kind of two components that define a while loop. We have a condition, and then we have the loop body. Okay, so we don't have an initialization piece, we don't have an increment piece, although you can certainly define those, either the initialization before entering the loop. In this case, we see that with, there's initialization going on with num equals 0. Okay, but it's actually kind of outside of the loop. So where it's kind of, with a for loop, it's embedded in the for loop construct. While loops, you would have the responsibility of doing that ahead of time. Okay, and you can also define an increment at the end of the loop body if you wanted to do something like that. So you can really make a while loop do something just like a for loop, though it tends to be good for when you're continuing to loop based on some condition. Okay, so it's not necessarily counting. This example below, we'll talk more about what a scanf function is later on. Effectively, this is asking a user to enter some information, particularly enter a number. Okay, and this loop below will continue to loop while someone enters anything besides -1. So it would just loop indefinitely until someone entered -1, and it would then quit. Okay, exclamation point equal means not equal. All right, we'll see more of that later on too, but that's what that means. It says continue to loop while num is not equal to -1. Okay. All right, so let's take a deeper look at let's look at a different example of a while loop, and I'm going to do something similar to that we've seen in some of the prior videos, where we look at a flow chart and kind of what it will look like. And I'm going to do this independent of this example. Then we'll see what it prints momentarily. Okay, so a while loop effectively does the following. It's a little bit of a simpler drawing than before. We check the condition. Okay, if the condition is true, we're going to enter the loop body. Okay, and it will then, once the loop body executes, it will come back and check the condition again. And if the condition is false, we are going to exit the loop. Okay. So a little bit of a simpler design than before with the for loop. There's a couple steps that are not there. And what we see is this example on the left-hand side here is exceptionally similar to a for loop. Effectively, what we're going to be doing is we say num equals 0. 0 is less than or equal to 4, so we enter the loop. We're going to print 0. Okay, then we're going to increment num by 1. And we're going to continue that process. So then we say num equals 1, well 1 is less than or equal to 4. We're going to print that, right? And it continues on. Okay, at some point we print 4, right? We say 4 is less than or equal to 4 is true. We print 4, now num becomes 5, but when we check the condition will be false and we'll leave the loop. Okay. So this would be equivalent to a for loop that prints 0 through 4, okay? And just like the for loop, if we ask the question, well, what is the value of num after this code runs? And it's actually 5, right? Last thing we print is 4, but the end value of num is actually 5, okay? So there's not too much to it. I mean, that's kind of the basic idea. These 10, like I mentioned before, you can use them in a way that's similar to for loops, but they can also be very powerful if you're dealing with examples that are, that you're continuing to loop until some condition becomes false, and it's not necessarily having to do with counting. Common examples would be if you required, say, the user to enter some information, say that you needed somebody to, for example, enter their first name. If they entered the name and they entered it and they included like a number, like the number 5 in there or something, you could be checking the input and say, oh no, that's wrong, and ask them again. And, so you continue asking them again and again until they enter something that's correct. Okay, you've all done that in filling out forms online. That it'll keep keep asking you to do something correctly over and over again until some condition is true. That's kind of similar to what a while loop is. It doesn't necessarily count or iterate a fixed number of times. It just depends on the data that's coming in and what's available. Okay. Now sometimes we want to do something that's more similar to what is considered a do while loop. Okay, this is a little bit of a different example, and the key thing behind that is, let me draw it in terms of a flow chart. If we look at what a do while loop is doing, okay, a do while loop does the following, right? We enter the loop body, okay, then we check the condition. Okay, if the condition's true, we continue to loop. If it's false, we're going to exit the loop. Okay, notice where the condition is. This forces the conditions happening after the loop body. The key thing with that is, notice that no matter what we do for a do while loop, is we always hit the loop body at least one time. Okay, that's not necessarily the case with the while loop, right? There's a chance that the loop body never gets executed, right? So notice the condition here comes second, okay, where if we look above, right, for a while loop, it comes first. Okay, so that's the big difference, is the order in which you want to have those happen. There's times that the do while loops are very, very handy because you want to ensure that you at least run through the loop body one time. Okay, example of a do while loop, something like this. All right, this asks the user to enter a number, and it will continue asking the user to enter a number until they enter -1. All right, so similar to before, notice that we do it this way, right? We're guaranteeing we're entering the loop body at least once. Okay, up here, right, with the while loop, we're kind of forcing the user. We're forcing the loop body to be entered once because we're initializing num to 0. So we'll have to say 0 is not equal to -1. So they effectively do the same thing. Okay, but there's times that the do while loop is a handy thing to be aware of and to use as well. Okay, now we'll practice these, right? But before we kind of wrap up our kind of review of loops, I want to point out that there's the possibility of having loops that are infinite, that never terminate. Okay, if you have a condition that's always true, that you will it will continue to loop until you kill the program. Okay, now here are there's 3 examples here of infinite loops. Right, we look at this. Right, well, this first one, well, why is this loop infinite? Why is it going to continue to print numbers till the end of time? Right, well, it's because num is 0. 0 is greater than or equal to 0, so it's true at the first time through, and then num just keeps getting bigger. Okay, so there's never a time where the number becomes less than 0. Okay, so that will result in an infinite loop, and I'm ignoring the logic results in an infinite loop. There is a little bit of a caveat to that in terms of if the numbers get so big and effectively has to kind of cycle over and be a low number. I'm not going to worry about that now, but effectively the logic is an infinite loop. It's going to run a very large number of times or an infinite number of times. It's similar to below, right? I is 0, right? Here it's adding 1. I is not going to become negative, right? It's going to continue to loop. Right? And then you could also do something like this, where you have a condition that's just true. That will also be an infinite loop. Okay. My little bit of a hesitation is there's a tiny caveat with what happens when numbers get so big, and what occurs to them when you run out of space to store them. But I don't want to get into that. And for now, when we think of it from an intro level, we're going to consider these to be infinite loops. There's actually a slight little caveat in terms of how information is stored in binary and what happens when you run out of space. But I don't want you to worry about that quite yet. Okay, So I'm going to wrap that up here and keep this video short for looking at while loops and do while loops. I think if you understand the basics, you're ready to start tracing some things and start practicing more with them, especially since it's not the first time that you've seen these. That brings us to what I would kind of consider in terms of lectures, the end of the review portion of the class. We're going to start transitioning into things that you might not have seen before, although some of it is likely to be familiar to you as well. Okay, so thanks for watching. Please, on these videos, I can't stress the importance of going back and listening again if you need to clarify anything. You'll hear me say that later on in the class as well, but these are really designed to be able to be watched multiple times, especially if anything is confusing. Okay, so thanks for watching, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.